February 24th, 1978. Five men leave Chico, California to watch a basketball game. They never make it home. Their car is found 4 days later on a remote mountain road, 70 miles from where they should have been. The keys are inside. The gas tank is a quarter full. The windows are down in freezing temperatures. But here's what makes this case impossible to explain. 4 months later, investigators find one of the men dead in a remote Forest Service trailer 19 miles from the car. The door was unlocked, there was food inside, a heating source, blankets. He'd been there for weeks, slowly dying. And before you ask, yes, he could have saved himself at any point. He chose not to. The Yuba County Five weren't experienced outdoorsmen. They weren't survivalists or adventurers. They were intellectually disabled men in their 20s and 30s, part of a local basketball team called the Gateway Gators. They had the minds of children in adult bodies, and they depended on routine, familiarity, and each other. Gary Mathias, 25, was different. He was the only one without an intellectual disability, but he had schizophrenia and was on antipsychotic medication. He'd recently been discharged from the Army and was living with his parents while getting treatment. Jack Madruga, 30, owned the car they'd be driving that night. He worked at a rehabilitation center and was described as responsible, careful, and proud of his white Mercury Montego. He kept that car immaculate. Bill Sterling, 29, was Jack's best friend, inseparable according to their families. Where one went, the other followed. Jackie Hewitt, 24, was the youngest and the most vulnerable. He had a low IQ and struggled with basic tasks. His family never let him go anywhere alone, except that night. Ted Weir, 32, was the biggest of the group, over 6 feet tall and heavyset. He was gentle, childlike, and completely dependent on structure. He lived in a state-run facility and rarely went anywhere without supervision. On February 24th, these 5 men had one plan: drive to Chico State University, watch their idols play basketball, then drive home. Simple, predictable, safe. They left Yuba City around 4 p.m. in Jack's Mercury. The game started at 8. It was a 50-mile drive south on Highway 70, straight shot, hard to get lost. They'd made the trip before. Witnesses saw them at the game. They were spotted in the stands, cheering, excited. The game ended around 10 p.m. They bought snacks at a nearby stand. Everything normal. And then they vanished. When the men didn't come home that night, families panicked immediately. These weren't guys who stayed out late. They didn't go on spontaneous road trips. Ted Weir had a doctor's appointment the next morning that he'd been talking about for days. He never missed appointments. Police were called, search parties formed, but there was nothing to go on. 5 men and a white Mercury Montego had simply disappeared between Chico and Yuba City on a clear, cold night. 4 days later, on February 28th, a Forest Service employee was checking snow conditions on a remote mountain road called Oroville-Quincy Road. It was a rugged route that ran through the Plumas National Forest, about 70 miles northeast of where the men should have been. There, at 4,400 feet elevation, he found Jack's car. The vehicle was nosed into a snowbank on the side of the road. Not crashed, just parked. The keys were in the ignition. The gas tank had enough fuel to drive for hours. The windows were rolled down despite temperatures in the 20s. The turn signal was on, weakly blinking, draining what was left of the battery. Inside, investigators found maps, a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, and some of the snacks from the basketball game. Outside, they found something that made no sense: a Scholl's foot powder wrapper and a half-eaten candy bar in the snow near the car. But no footprints. The snow had covered everything. Here's what the evidence showed. Someone had driven that car up the mountain road carefully and deliberately. The route required navigating narrow switchbacks and steep grades. This wasn't someone fleeing in panic or driving recklessly, but the road was closed for winter. It wasn't plowed. It wasn't maintained. There were no tire tracks behind them. because fresh snow had fallen. Why would 5 intellectually disabled men and their schizophrenic friend drive 70 miles in the wrong direction, up a mountain road in winter, at night, and then abandon a perfectly functional vehicle? Search and rescue teams mobilized immediately, but the conditions were brutal. Heavy snow, sub-zero nights. The area was vast, trackless wilderness. Bloodhounds picked up scents but lost them quickly in the snow. Helicopters spotted nothing. Investigators interviewed everyone who'd seen the men that night. A store clerk remembered them buying snacks. A woman remembered seeing the white Mercury on a mountain road that night, driving slowly, carefully, as if the driver was lost. She said the car had several people inside, and they looked confused. Another witness, a man named Joseph Shones, came forward with a strange story. He'd been driving on that same mountain road the night the men disappeared. His car got stuck in the snow. While waiting for help, he saw headlights approaching. A vehicle pulled up behind him, stopped, and the headlights went out. He called out for help. No one answered. Sean said he heard voices, whistling. Someone seemed to be in distress. He grew frightened and stayed in his car. Eventually, he had a mild heart attack from stress and exposure. When he was rescued the next morning, the other vehicle was gone. He later identified it as matching Jack's Mercury. But here's the problem with Sean's story. He didn't report it for weeks. He had a history of mental health issues. Investigators weren't sure how much to believe, but the timeline matched, the location matched, and it explained how the car ended up where it did. It didn't explain what happened next. Weeks passed, spring arrived, the snow began to melt, and on June 4th, 1978, more than 3 months after the disappearance, a motorcycle trail crew was clearing a route near Oroville-Quincy Road when they found something. A Forest Service trailer, 19.4 miles from where the car was found. It was a small shelter used by workers in the summer, stocked with supplies and unlocked. The door was open. Inside, they found Ted Weir's body. He'd been dead for weeks, possibly months, but the scene inside that trailer was what made this case spiral into nightmare territory. The trailer was stocked with sea rations, military surplus meals that could sustain a person for months. Enough food to keep 5 men alive until spring. Ted had opened a few cans. Most were untouched. He'd eaten some, then stopped. There was a propane heater with enough fuel to keep the trailer warm for weeks. It was off. Ted had apparently turned it on at some point because there were burnt matches nearby. But then he'd let it go out, and he never turned it back on. There were blankets, heavy wool blankets designed for freezing conditions. Ted was found lying on a wooden platform wrapped in thin bed sheets. The blankets were stacked on a shelf 5 feet away. The coroner determined Ted had died of a combination of hypothermia and starvation. He'd lost between 80 and 100 pounds. His feet were badly frostbitten. He'd wrapped them in cloth, but had apparently taken his shoes off at some point and never put them back on. Investigators found his shoes outside the trailer, neatly placed by the door. Here's what kept investigators awake at night. Ted Weir survived in that trailer for at least 8 weeks, possibly longer. He had food, he had heat, he had shelter, but he slowly starved and froze to death instead of using the resources 5 feet away from him. Some have suggested Ted was following orders, that Gary Mathias, the only member of the group without an intellectual disability, had told him to ration the food or not touch certain supplies. And Ted, childlike and obedient, followed those instructions even as he died. But that theory requires Gary to have been there. And if Gary was there, why did he leave Ted to die? Why didn't he save him? In the weeks following the discovery of Ted's body, search teams combed the area. On June 19th, they found the remains of Jackie Hewitt about 11.5 miles from the trailer, under a tree. He'd apparently died of exposure. Later, they found Jack Madruga's remains about 10 miles from the trailer, then Bill Sterling, even farther away. Both had died of exposure in the wilderness. All 3 had been walking away from the car, deeper into the forest. Gary Mathias was never found. To this day, his body has never been recovered. He simply vanished into the Plumas National Forest and never came out. So what happened? The evidence creates more questions than answers. Theory 1. They got lost. But the route from Chico to Yuba City is straightforward. Jack knew the area. He was a careful driver. And even if they missed a turn, why drive 70 miles into the mountains? Why not turn around when they realized their mistake? Theory 2. Gary Mathias had a psychotic episode. He was off his medication, which could have triggered delusions or paranoia. Maybe he convinced the others they were being followed or that they needed to hide. The group trusted him. They would have followed his lead. But if Gary was having a breakdown, why did he navigate the dangerous mountain road so carefully? Witnesses said the car was being driven slowly, deliberately. That doesn't match someone in the grip of psychosis. Theory 3. They encountered someone. Joseph Schoen's story, unreliable as it might be, suggests the men stopped to help him or were stopped by someone else. Maybe they were threatened. Maybe they were chased off the road. But if they were fleeing an attacker, why leave the car with keys in the ignition? Why not drive away? And why would an attacker let them wander into the forest instead of something worse? Theory 4. The one law enforcement has never fully dismissed. They were chased or forced off the main road by someone, abandoned the car in panic, and then tried to survive in terrain they didn't understand. Gary, the only one capable of making decisions, either died quickly or fled and left the others behind. But that doesn't explain Ted in the trailer. It doesn't explain why he had access to everything he needed to survive and didn't use it. The official cause of death for the 4 recovered bodies was exposure and starvation. The manner of death was ruled undetermined, which is a polite way of saying investigators had no idea what happened. Families were left with fragments, a timeline that made no sense, evidence that contradicted every logical explanation, and one missing man whose fate remains unknown. Some believe Gary Mathias orchestrated the whole thing, that he led them into the wilderness deliberately. But why? What possible motive could he have had? These were his friends, his support system. Others believe something far stranger happened that night, something that can't be explained by conventional logic. But those theories rely on speculation, not evidence. What we know for certain is this: 5 men left Chico on a Friday night to watch a basketball game. They never made it home. 4 of them died in the wilderness, miles from help, with resources they couldn't or wouldn't use. One of them survived for weeks in a stocked shelter and slowly starved to death instead of saving himself. And one of them vanished completely. The Yuba County Five case remains one of the most bizarre and unexplainable disappearances in American history, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. An answer. 47 years later, Gary Mathias is still missing. His family still hopes for closure. Investigators have moved on. The case is cold, filed away, occasionally revisited when someone stumbles across it and asks the same questions. What happened on that mountain road? Why did they drive there? What did they see? What did they fear? We'll probably never know.